Two brothers, two sisters, one unbreakable bond, put to the ultimate test. Ethan and Caleb Walker grew up side by side, their connection deeper than blood. When they met Emma and Olivia Harper, fate intertwined their lives in ways they never expected. Love, ambition, betrayal, and redemption, this is a story of family, resilience, and the choices that define us. But can their bond survive when everything falls apart? Where are you watching from? Subscribe now so you never miss another unforgettable story. Ethan and Caleb Walker had been inseparable since birth, their lives intertwined from the moment they entered the world, just 5 minutes apart. Growing up on their family's ranch in the heart of Montana, they spent their days surrounded by open fields, towering mountains, and the steady rhythm of ranch life. Their father, James Walker, had inherited the land from his father before him, and from a young age, the twins were expected to carry on the legacy. But Ethan and Caleb were as different as the land and the sky. Ethan, the elder twin, was steady, disciplined, and methodical, the type to think through every decision before making a move. He had a natural way with the horses, an instinct that allowed him to sense when an animal was restless or unwell. While their father taught them both the skills of ranching, Ethan was the one who truly embraced it, taking on responsibilities with a quiet sense of duty. Caleb, on the other hand, was a wildfire. He had an undeniable energy that made him restless, always searching for the next thrill. Whether it was racing horses across the open plains or pushing the limits of his truck down winding dirt roads, he thrived on adventure. He was charming and quick with a grin, the kind of man who could talk his way out of trouble just as easily as he could land himself in it. Despite their differences, there was an unspoken connection between them, something deeper than just brotherhood. Their bond went beyond words, beyond reason. If Ethan was hurt, Caleb felt it. If Caleb was angry, Ethan knew before a single word was spoken. As kids, they had tested it over and over again, playing games where one would close his eyes and try to sense where the other was hiding. More often than not, they found each other without fail. Their father used to shake his head and say, "You boys have something special. You better not take it for granted." For the longest time, they never did. It was in the neighboring town of Rosewood, just a few miles from the ranch where the Harper sisters lived. Emma and Olivia had been just as inseparable as Ethan and Caleb, two halves of a whole. Their parents owned a small but beloved bakery, a warm, inviting place that had been a staple in the town for decades. Emma was the planner, the responsible one, with a sharp mind for business and an eye for detail. She was the one who made sure the bakery ran smoothly, balancing the books, organizing deliveries, and handling the never-ending stream of customers who passed through their doors. Olivia, on the other hand, was a dreamer. She had a restless heart, much like Caleb, always wanting more than what their small town could offer. She loved meeting new people, exploring new places, and imagining a future that stretched far beyond the walls of the bakery. Though their bond was just as strong as the Walker twins, they expressed it differently. Emma was the rock Olivia leaned on, the steady presence that kept her grounded. Olivia, in turn, was the spark that brought excitement into Emma's life, pushing her to step outside her carefully constructed plans and embrace the unexpected. The paths of the Walkers and the Harpers might have never crossed had it not been for the annual county fair, a tradition that brought people from all over to celebrate the heart and soul of their community. The event was a grand affair, filled with food stalls, live music, and the much-anticipated horseback races that drew crowds from across the county. Ethan and Caleb had been there, representing their family's ranch, showcasing their best horses and inviting visitors to sign up for riding lessons. It was more than just business. It was about keeping their family's legacy alive. Emma and Olivia, meanwhile, were working at their family's bakery stall, serving fresh pastries and hot coffee to the festival goers. They had done it every year since they were kids, but something about that summer felt different, like the beginning of something they couldn't quite put into words. It happened in an instant. Olivia, balancing a tray of steaming coffee cups, miscalculated a step while weaving through the crowd. The tray tipped dangerously, and before she could react, a strong hand shot out, steadying it just in time. She looked up, startled, and found herself staring into the amused, deep green eyes of a man she had never seen before. "Nice reflexes," she said, catching her breath. Caleb grinned. "I've had practice." The moment stretched between them, something electric hanging in the air. But before Olivia could say anything else, Caleb was already walking away, flashing her a playful wink before disappearing into the crowd. Meanwhile, just a few feet away, Emma was struggling to lift a heavy sack of flour behind the bakery stall. She had nearly managed to get it onto the counter when another pair of hands took the weight from her, setting it down effortlessly. She turned, slightly breathless, and found herself looking up at a man with a quiet, steady presence. His dark hair was slightly tousled from the wind, his eyes warm and patient. "Thank you," she said, pushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Any time," Ethan replied simply. Their conversation was brief, but as the day wore on, neither Emma nor Olivia could shake the feeling that something significant had just begun, and neither could Ethan or Caleb. The fair continued, and yet somehow the four of them kept finding themselves drawn back to one another. Olivia and Caleb gravitated toward each other naturally, their conversations effortless and filled with laughter. He teased her about her overcomplicated coffee orders. She dared him to enter a last-minute horseback race, which he did, of course, without hesitation. Ethan and Emma, on the other hand, found themselves in deeper conversations. They talked about their families, their businesses, their hopes for the future. Unlike Caleb and Olivia, who thrived on the thrill of the moment, Ethan and Emma built something quieter, something steady, like the foundation of a house being laid brick by brick. As the festival came to an end and the warm summer evening settled over the town, Ethan and Caleb sat on the porch of their ranch, staring out at the rolling fields. They didn't have to say anything. They both knew. This was different. This was the start of something real. The days after the county fair were different. Something had shifted, though neither Ethan nor Caleb could put it into words. The familiar routines of ranch life, the early mornings spent tending to the horses, the long afternoons mending fences or breaking in new colts, suddenly felt like they carried an undercurrent of anticipation. Ethan found himself looking at his phone more often than usual, considering a message he had yet to send. Caleb, never one to sit around waiting, had already acted. It started with a simple message from him to Olivia. "Thinking of taking one of the horses out for a sunset ride. You up for an adventure?" It took only a few minutes before Olivia's reply came through. Always. That evening, as the sky burned in shades of orange and gold, Olivia pulled up to the ranch in her old but reliable Jeep. She barely had time to step out before Caleb appeared, leading 2 saddled horses toward her with his signature mischievous grin. "You ride, right?" he asked, handing her the reins of a chestnut mare. Olivia smirked. "I grew up in Montana, didn't I?" With that, they were off. The cool evening breeze rushed past them as their horses galloped across the open fields, the rolling hills stretching endlessly before them. Olivia let out a breathless laugh as her mare picked up speed, keeping pace with Caleb's stallion. "You do this all the time?" she called over the sound of hoofbeats. "All the time," Caleb grinned. but it's more fun with company. By the time they slowed to a walk, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind streaks of fading color in the sky. They stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley, the quiet of the evening settling around them like a soft blanket. For the first time since they had met, Olivia felt her usual bravado falter. "This place is incredible," she admitted, gazing at the endless expanse of land before her. Caleb, who had spent his entire life on this ranch, had never thought much about it. But seeing it through Olivia's eyes made it feel new again. "I think so too," he said quietly. Neither of them said anything after that. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full of something unspoken. Something that felt like the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. While Caleb and Olivia's evening had been spontaneous and thrilling, Ethan's approach to Emma was more measured, more deliberate. He didn't message her right away. He thought about it first, considered his words carefully. The next morning, he finally sent it. "Hope you're having a good morning. Wanted to thank you again for all your help at the festival. If you're free, I'd love to show you the ranch sometime. No pressure, just a quiet tour." Emma read the message twice, appreciating the thoughtfulness behind it. She wasn't one to rush into things, but something about Ethan's calm presence made her feel at ease. "That sounds nice. How about tomorrow afternoon?" And just like that, their first outing was set. The following day, when Emma arrived at the ranch, Ethan was already waiting for her by the stables, his hands tucked into his pockets. He greeted her with a small smile, then led her toward the pastures where the horses grazed lazily under the warm afternoon sun. Unlike Caleb, who thrived on excitement, Ethan was patient. He took his time explaining everything to Emma. The history of the ranch, the way the land had been passed down for generations, the unique personalities of each horse. Emma listened intently, drawn to the quiet confidence in his voice. She had always appreciated structure and stability, and Ethan embodied both of those things. At one point, they stopped beside a wooden fence, watching as a young colt pranced playfully in the field. "You really love this place," Emma observed. Ethan nodded. "It's all I've ever known. But it's not just about me. It's about keeping it going for the next generation." Emma understood that feeling all too well. She had spent years helping her parents run their bakery, feeling the same deep-rooted sense of responsibility. It was something she had never been able to fully explain to others before, but with Ethan, she didn't have to. He just got it. As they continued walking, the conversation shifted to their families, their childhoods, their ambitions. Unlike Caleb and Olivia, who had dived headfirst into adventure, Ethan and Emma were building something slowly, something solid, something real. By the time the sun began to set, Emma felt something she hadn't expected. Comfort. Not the kind that made her restless or eager to escape, but the kind that felt like home. And as Ethan watched her drive away, he knew one thing for certain. He wanted to see her again. In the weeks that followed, the connections between the Walker twins and the Harper sisters only grew stronger. Caleb and Olivia thrived on excitement, always chasing the next adventure. They went on spontaneous road trips, hiked trails leading to hidden waterfalls, and spent late nights dancing under the neon lights of small-town bars. Olivia pushed Caleb to take risks, to step outside his comfort zone. In turn, Caleb gave Olivia a sense of stability she had never realized she needed. Ethan and Emma, meanwhile, found comfort in the quiet moments. They spent evenings cooking together, shared long conversations on the ranch porch, and enjoyed the steady rhythm of simply being in each other's presence. There was no need for grand gestures or elaborate plans, just two people who understood each other in a way that didn't require words. It wasn't long before their families began to take notice. Their parents exchanged knowing glances. Their friends teased them about how inseparable they had become. The once parallel lives of the Walker twins and the Harper sisters had now fully intertwined, and it was clear to everyone around them. This wasn't just a fleeting romance. This was something real, something lasting, something neither of them could have anticipated. But none of them could have imagined just how much their lives were about to change. The day of the wedding arrived with the crisp scent of fresh-cut hay mingling with the sweetness of blooming wildflowers. The Walker Ranch had been transformed into something almost magical, a sprawling field of white chairs lined in perfect rows, rustic wooden arches wrapped in soft greenery and delicate fabric, and lanterns hanging from the towering oak trees, ready to glow as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon. For weeks the town had buzzed with excitement. A double wedding was rare enough, but the fact that it involved two pairs of twins only added to the intrigue. It was a story straight out of folklore. Two brothers, two sisters, bound by fate, standing at the threshold of a future no one could have predicted. Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his sleeves, his fingers steady, his mind calm. It wasn't nervousness he felt, it was certainty. He had known since the first quiet evening on the ranch with Emma that she was the one. There had never been a moment of doubt. Across the room, Caleb was anything but calm. He paced the floor, his hands running through his hair every few minutes, his usual confidence slipping as reality set in. "You're wearing a hole in the floor," Ethan remarked, a small smirk playing on his lips. Caleb stopped, exhaling sharply. "How are you so damn calm?" Ethan shrugged. "Because I know this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Caleb let out a breathless chuckle, shaking his head. Yeah, I do too. But damn, man, this is huge." Ethan clapped a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You love her, right?" "More than I can put into words," Caleb admitted, his voice softer than usual. "Then let's go make this official." The ceremony began as the golden afternoon light stretched across the fields. A hush fell over the gathered guests as Emma and Olivia appeared at the end of the aisle, their arms linked, their smiles radiant. Emma was breathtaking in an elegant lace gown that flowed with every step she took. Her expression was calm, steady, but filled with an unmistakable glow. She wasn't a woman who wore her emotions on her sleeve, but today there was no hiding her happiness. Beside her, Olivia was a vision of effortless beauty. While Emma's dress was timeless and classic, Olivia's had a hint of rebellion, a daring slit, a touch of gold embroidery that caught the light, and in her eyes there was that ever-present spark of adventure, as if even now she was ready to turn this into a grand adventure of its own. Ethan felt his breath hitch as Emma met his gaze. For a man who had spent his life planning, who had always thought 100 steps ahead, nothing had ever been as simple or as clear as this moment. Caleb, standing beside him, felt like his heart might just pound out of his chest. He had never been afraid of anything before. Not wild horses, not fast cars, not even the unknown. But as Olivia walked toward him, he realized something terrifying. For the first time in his life, something mattered more than his own freedom. And he had never wanted anything more. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt, and filled with the kind of love that didn't need elaborate words to be understood. Vows were exchanged, hands were held, promises were made. There were tears, laughter, and quiet moments of unspoken understanding. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers erupted across the field, echoing into the open sky. The reception was a blur of celebration. Music filled the air, the rhythmic strum of a country band playing beneath the twinkling fairy lights. People danced, drank, and toasted to a future that seemed as bright as the stars overhead. At one point, Olivia spun in circles on the dance floor as Caleb lifted her off her feet, her laughter ringing through the night. Nearby, Ethan and Emma sat at the edge of the crowd, watching the lanterns float into the sky. Their hands intertwined, their hearts steady. For the first time in a long time, there was nothing to worry about. No business decisions, no responsibilities, no doubts. Just them. Just this moment. Just the start of something new. As the night stretched on, and the newlyweds stole quiet moments away from the chaos of the celebration, they had no way of knowing what lay ahead. No way of knowing that this perfect moment, this stillness, this peace, would not last forever. Because life had a way of testing even the strongest of bonds. And their greatest challenge was yet to come. The honeymoon phase was everything they had hoped for. The transition into married life felt natural, seamless even, as if Ethan and Caleb had always been meant to walk this path alongside Emma and Olivia. The mornings started with quiet moments. Ethan and Emma sipping coffee on the porch as the sun painted the Montana sky in soft hues, while Caleb and Olivia, never once to sit still, often found themselves in the truck before dawn, chasing new views, new adventures, new thrills. But as the weeks passed, reality began to settle in. The ranch, once just a family legacy, was now their shared responsibility. Expanding it had always been part of the plan, but now, with two new minds involved, ideas were clashing more than complementing. At first, it was just small differences, Ethan's need for meticulous planning versus Caleb's impulse to move fast and take risks. "We have an opportunity to expand beyond just horseback riding," Caleb said one evening, pacing the kitchen as he rattled off ideas. "We could build cabins, offer guided hunting trips, ATV tours, something to bring in the kind of crowd willing to spend real money." Ethan frowned slightly, leaning back in his chair. "We're a horse ranch, Caleb. That's what we do best. People come here for the experience of working with the animals, learning the land. We shouldn't stretch ourselves too thin." Olivia, standing near the sink, folded her arms. "I think Caleb's right. There's more to Montana than just horses, and we need to keep up with what people actually want." Emma, sitting beside Ethan, shook her head. "We need to grow smart, not fast. What if we invest too much too soon and the returns don't cover it?" Caleb scoffed. "You can't succeed without taking some risks." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And you can't keep throwing money at ideas without a solid plan." The conversation ended without resolution. That night, as Ethan and Emma lay in bed, he could feel the weight of the argument still lingering between them. "He's going to push too hard too fast," Ethan murmured. Emma sighed, running a hand over his chest. "He just wants to prove himself. You two have always done things together, but maybe he wants to carve out something that's his own." Ethan exhaled slowly. He understood that feeling better than anyone, but something about Caleb's urgency felt different this time, more reckless, more desperate, and that worried him. The strain only grew over the following weeks. Caleb, frustrated by Ethan's resistance, started making decisions without consulting him. It began with small things, investing in new marketing strategies without discussion, setting up meetings with business partners Ethan had never heard of. Then came the bigger move. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Ethan walked into the ranch office and found paperwork on the desk. Loan agreements. Numbers that didn't match what they had discussed. His stomach turned. Caleb had taken out a loan, without telling him. The anger came fast, burning through the edges of his usual calm. He stormed out, finding Caleb outside near the stables, tossing hay into the troughs. "You took out a loan?" Ethan's voice was tight, controlled, but just barely. Caleb didn't even flinch. "Yeah." "And?" Ethan stepped closer, fists clenching at his sides. "You went behind my back, Caleb. You made a decision that affects both of us without even having a conversation about it." Caleb dropped the pitchfork against the fence, shaking his head. "You wouldn't have agreed. You never want to take risks. You just want to sit back and do things the way Dad did, but times are changing, Ethan." "This isn't about Dad," Ethan shot back. "This is about trust. About the fact that we built this place together, and you just decided that your way was the only way." "I'm trying to move us forward," Caleb snapped. "But you're so damn afraid of change that you're going to let this place rot while the rest of the world passes us by." The words stung. Ethan stared at his brother, the weight of years of unspoken tension pressing between them. "This isn't just about the ranch, is it?" Ethan said quietly. "This is about you trying to prove something." Caleb's expression flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. "If you keep pushing like this, you're going to lose more than just this ranch. You're going to lose the people who actually care about you." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You don't get to decide what's best for me, Ethan." Ethan exhaled sharply, stepping back. "No, but I get to decide what's best for me. And if you're going to keep making decisions like this, then maybe we don't need to be in business together anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in their lives, the idea of walking separate paths wasn't just a fleeting thought, it was a real possibility. Caleb didn't say a word. He just turned and walked away. Inside the house, Emma and Olivia had heard the entire argument from the open window. Emma placed a hand over her mouth, concern knitting her brows. Olivia, arms crossed, stared out at Caleb's retreating figure. "He's not going to back down." Emma swallowed hard. "Neither is Ethan." That night, Caleb packed a bag and left. He didn't say where he was going. Didn't leave a note, just disappeared into the night, leaving behind the ranch, the business, and the brother he had spent his entire life beside. And for the first time in years, Ethan sat alone on the porch, staring out at the land they had built together, wondering if he had just lost the one person who had always been by his side. Caleb didn't return the next day, or the day after that. At first, Ethan told himself not to care. If Caleb wanted to be stubborn, let him. If he thought he could do everything on his own, let him try. But as the days stretched into a week, then 2, Ethan couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was wrong. He hadn't just lost a business partner, he'd lost his brother. Olivia was the only one who seemed to have any idea where Caleb had gone. She didn't give many details, only that he was staying in town, renting a small cabin near the edge of Rosewood. But whenever Ethan brought it up, Olivia's jaw would set, her arms crossing in that defiant way she always did when she was protecting something or someone. "He just needs time," she said one evening when Ethan caught her alone on the porch. Ethan let out a sharp breath. Time for what? To let his ego cool off? He went behind my back, Olivia. He took a damn loan out without telling me. And he did it because he felt like you never trusted him, she shot back. You treat him like a reckless kid who's always going to screw things up, but maybe, just maybe, Caleb wants to prove that he can stand on his own. Ethan clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling in his chest. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? Olivia's eyes softened, but her voice didn't waver. Look, I'm not saying what he did was right, but you know Caleb. When has he ever backed down from something he believes in? Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. He knew she was right. Caleb had always been the one to charge ahead, the one to leap before he looked. But he had never done it without Ethan by his side. And that was the part Ethan couldn't let go of. Meanwhile, in town, Caleb was burning himself out trying to make his expansion project work. He had poured every ounce of his energy and every dollar from that secret loan into building what he saw as the future of the ranch. He'd already secured a deal to construct a set of luxury cabins for high-paying guests, along with an ATV rental station and guided adventure tours through the mountains. But the problem was, he was doing it alone. Without Ethan's careful planning, without Emma's financial oversight, things were slipping through the cracks. Deadlines were getting missed, costs were piling up faster than he'd anticipated. He told himself he had it under control, but even Olivia could see the exhaustion wearing on him. One night, after another long day overseeing construction, Olivia found Caleb sitting on the cabin porch, a beer dangling loosely from his fingertips. "You look like hell," she said, sitting beside him. He let out a dry laugh. "Feel like it too." She hesitated, then said quietly, "You don't have to do this alone, you know." Caleb stared out at the darkened hills. "Yeah. And go crawling back to Ethan so he can say, 'I told you so'?" Olivia sighed. "That's not what he wants, and you know it." Caleb took a slow sip of his beer, his fingers tightening around the bottle. After a long moment, he muttered, "What if I already screwed this up too much to fix it?" And that was the first time Olivia saw it. Not just his exhaustion, but the fear beneath it. Caleb had spent his whole life outrunning his doubts, convincing himself that if he moved fast enough, pushed hard enough, he could always land on his feet. But this time, he wasn't sure he could. Things reached a breaking point 2 days later. Ethan had been in town for supplies when he overheard a conversation at the hardware store, one that stopped him in his tracks. "You hear about Walker's expansion project?" an older rancher muttered to his friend. "Damn fool took out a loan he can't pay back. Bank's already breathing down his neck." Ethan's chest tightened. He knew Caleb had taken a risk, but this was worse than he'd thought. Without thinking, he drove straight to Caleb's cabin. Caleb was standing outside when Ethan pulled up, arms crossed, his jaw already tight. He knew exactly why his brother was here. Ethan barely made it 2 steps before he snapped, "Are you in financial trouble?" Caleb stiffened. "That's none of your business." "The hell it isn't." Ethan's voice was sharp, his patience gone. "I just heard in town that the bank is coming after you." "Jesus, Caleb, how bad is it?" Caleb's silence was answer enough. Ethan swore under his breath. "Damn it, Caleb! Why didn't you tell me?" Caleb's hands curled into fists. "Because I didn't need you to swoop in and fix things, okay? I can handle it." Ethan took a step closer, his expression hard. "Can you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about to lose everything." The words hit their mark. Caleb let out a slow breath, running a hand over his face. "I thought I could make it work," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "But I got in over my head. The costs are higher than I expected, and the loan payments are coming in faster than I can keep up with." Ethan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Why didn't you just talk to me before it got this bad?" Caleb hesitated. Then, almost too quiet to hear, he said, "Because I was afraid you'd say no." Ethan blinked. Of all the things he expected, that wasn't one of them. Caleb let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You always have a plan, Ethan. You always think everything through. And me? I've always been the one who just jumps first and figures it out later. I wanted to prove I could do something on my own, that I wasn't just the screw-up younger brother." Ethan's chest tightened. He had spent so long being frustrated with Caleb, so long seeing only the recklessness, that he had never stopped to consider what was underneath it. That maybe, just maybe, Caleb had been chasing something more than just success. Maybe he had been chasing his own worth. For the first time in weeks, Ethan's anger ebbed, replaced by something else. Understanding. Ethan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You're not a screw-up, Caleb, and you sure as hell don't have to do this alone." Caleb swallowed hard. "So what do we do now?" Ethan looked at the half-built cabins, at the unfinished dream his brother had risked everything for. Then he turned back to Caleb and said, "We fix it. Together." For the first time in a long time, Caleb felt like he could breathe again. And just like that, the first step toward mending everything had finally been taken. The storm rolled in faster than expected, dark clouds swallowing the sky as the wind howled through the open pastures. Ethan had been restless all day, an uneasy feeling pressing against his chest like an invisible weight. Something was wrong. He just didn't know what. Caleb had left earlier that afternoon to check on the far pasture, the one closest to the river. Normally they would have gone together, but things between them were still fragile, still mending but not fully healed. Caleb had insisted he could handle it on his own, and Ethan, still trying to trust his brother again, had let him. Now, as the rain began to lash against the windows of the ranch house, he regretted it. Emma stood in the doorway, watching as Ethan paced near the fireplace. "He'll be fine," she said softly. "Caleb's been out in worse storms." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "Yeah, but this doesn't feel right." She didn't argue. She had been with Ethan long enough to know that when he got a feeling like this, it was rarely wrong. Then the phone rang. Ethan snatched it up before the second ring. Walker Ranch. "Hey, Ethan!" It was Olivia's voice, but something in it made his blood run cold. "Caleb hasn't come back." His heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "He left for the pasture hours ago. He should have been back by now. I tried calling him, but he's not answering." Ethan didn't wait to hear more. He grabbed his jacket, shoved his boots on, and was out the door before Emma could stop him. The wind nearly knocked him sideways as he stepped onto the porch, but he didn't care. Olivia was already running toward him from her Jeep, her face pale with worry. "I'm coming with you," she said, breathless. Ethan didn't argue. They jumped into his truck, the tires kicking up mud as he tore down the winding dirt road toward the pasture. Rain pounded against the windshield, making it nearly impossible to see. He drove faster anyway. A sick feeling coiled in his stomach as they neared the river. The fencing on the far pasture had been damaged in the last storm, and Caleb had insisted on fixing it before the next one hit. But if the river had risen, if the ground had softened too much, then they saw it. The horse. Caleb's stallion was pacing anxiously near the broken fence, its reins still hanging loosely. Ethan slammed on the brakes, barely putting the truck in park before he jumped out. His boots sank into the mud as he ran toward the fence, his eyes scanning the field frantically. Then he saw the body. Caleb. Ethan was at his brother's side in seconds, dropping to his knees in the wet grass. Caleb was conscious, barely, his face pale and streaked with mud. A deep gash ran along his arm, blood soaking into his shirt. His breathing was shallow, his lips tight with pain. Noah's hands trembled as he checked him over. What happened? Caleb let out a weak laugh that turned into a grimace. Fence gave out. Horse spooked. Through me. Ethan swore under his breath. Caleb had broken bones before, had been thrown off horses more times than either of them could count, but this was different. His body was tense with pain, and when Ethan pressed lightly against his ribs, Caleb sucked in a sharp breath. Probably cracked ribs, maybe worse. Olivia was already on the phone with emergency services, her voice urgent but controlled. Ethan barely heard her. All he could focus on was Caleb, on the way his brother's breathing hitched, on the blood staining the grass beneath him. "Stay with me," Ethan said, gripping Caleb's shoulder. "You hear me? You're not passing out on me." Caleb let out a weak smirk. Bossy as ever. Ethan's throat tightened. "Yeah, well, someone's got to keep your reckless ass alive." The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later, though it felt like hours. The paramedics quickly assessed Caleb, confirming Ethan's fears: concussion, fractured ribs, and a nasty wound on his arm that would need stitches. "You're lucky," one of them said as they loaded him into the ambulance. "Could have been a lot worse." Ethan swallowed hard. He knew that too well. At the hospital, the hours crawled by. Emma and Olivia sat in the waiting room, their hands clasped together in silent worry. Ethan stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. And the doctor finally emerged. Ethan was the first to his feet. "He's stable," the doctor said. "Sore, but stable. He'll need to take it easy for a while, but he's going to be okay." Relief crashed over Ethan so fast he had to sit down. They let him in to see Caleb first. His brother was lying in the hospital bed, looking pale but very much alive. The moment their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Neither of them were the type to say what they really felt, not in words anyway. But they had never needed words to understand each other. Ethan pulled up a chair beside the bed, letting out a slow breath. "You scared the hell out of me, you know that?" Caleb chuckled weakly. "Didn't mean to." Silence settled between them. Then, finally, Ethan spoke again. "You don't have to prove anything to me, Caleb." His voice was quieter now, the weight of the last few months pressing down on him. "You never did." Caleb blinked, his expression unreadable. Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "I know I push too hard sometimes, and I know I act like I always have the right answer. But I don't want to run this ranch without you. I don't want to do any of this without you." Caleb swallowed hard. Ethan sat back, exhaling. "You don't have to do things my way, but you don't have to do them alone, either." A long pause. Then Caleb nodded, just once. "All right," he murmured. "We do this together." And just like that, the rift between them finally began to close. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but between them, it didn't have to be. They had always known how to find their way back to each other. The weeks following Caleb's accident forced everyone to slow down, whether they liked it or not. At first, he resisted the idea of resting, insisting that he was fine, but Ethan wasn't having it. Neither was Olivia. Between the two of them, they made sure Caleb followed the doctor's instructions, keeping him from overexerting himself, making him sit out from ranch work, and, much to his frustration, ensuring he didn't lift anything heavier than a cup of coffee. "You're acting like I lost a limb," Caleb grumbled one morning from the porch, watching Ethan and a few of the ranch hands move bales of hay across the pasture. Ethan, standing nearby, didn't even look at him. "You might as well have, considering how useless you are right now." Caleb scowled. "I could at least supervise. You could also sit there, drink your coffee, and not break your ribs all over again." Olivia, stepping out onto the porch, smirked as she handed Caleb a fresh cup. "I hate to say it, but for once, Ethan's right." Caleb groaned, tipping his head back. "This is hell." "Welcome to taking a break," Olivia teased, sitting beside him. "You should try it more often." For all his complaints, Caleb knew deep down that this forced pause was exactly what he needed. The last few months had been nothing but a whirlwind of ambition and stubbornness, pushing himself to prove something neither Ethan nor anyone else had ever demanded of him. Now, as he sat back and watched the ranch operate without him running himself into the ground, he had to admit he had been doing too much. And he hadn't been the only one. Ethan had been different too, more willing to let go of the iron grip he'd kept on the business, more willing to accept that success didn't mean controlling every little detail. One evening, after the workday was done, the four of them, Ethan, Caleb, Emma, and Olivia, gathered on the back porch of the ranch. The air was warm, the sky painted in soft hues of gold and lavender, and for the first time in a long time they just sat in silence, listening to the wind in the trees, the distant sounds of horses in the pasture. Caleb glanced at Ethan, then at Emma and Olivia, before finally speaking. "We need to slow down." Ethan exhaled, nodding slightly. "Yeah, I think you're right." Emma and Olivia exchanged glances, waiting. "We've been pushing so hard," Caleb continued, resting his coffee cup against his knee. "Trying to build something big, trying to make it all happen as fast as possible. But what's the point if we're too burned out to enjoy it?" Olivia bit her lip, her usual instinct to push forward, clashing with the truth in his words. "I just didn't want us to lose momentum," she admitted. "We won't," Emma said gently. "But we can't keep moving at this pace. We need to find a way to do this without driving ourselves into the ground." No one spoke for a long moment. Then Noah ran a hand through his hair, thinking, "So what does that mean? What do we change?" They spent the next few hours talking, really talking, in a way they hadn't in months. They discussed their schedules, their priorities, the things that had been weighing them down. They admitted the things they hadn't wanted to say before, that they had all been feeling overwhelmed, that the pressure of success had started to take away the joy they had once felt in what they were building. The solution wasn't immediate, but it started with small changes. They agreed to hire more staff, to delegate responsibilities instead of trying to do everything themselves. Ethan and Caleb agreed to take designated days off, something they had resisted before, believing that as owners, they had to be involved in everything. Emma and Olivia restructured the business planning, ensuring that growth wouldn't come at the expense of their well-being. For the first time in a long time, it felt like they were all moving in the same direction again. The weeks that followed were different. There was still hard work to be done, still challenges to face, but the weight of it all didn't feel as suffocating anymore. Dylan spent more time focusing on what he loved, working directly with the horses, training new riders. Caleb took on more of the operational side of the business, finding a balance between his natural energy and the structure that kept things running smoothly. Emma streamlined the finances, ensuring they could grow sustainably without unnecessary stress. Olivia channeled her enthusiasm into making the business known, but she also learned to step back, to trust that things didn't have to happen all at once. Their relationships, once strained by exhaustion and unspoken frustrations, began to heal in ways that felt natural. Ethan and Emma found comfort in the small, steady moments they had always cherished. Quiet nights on the porch, morning coffee before the day began, shared smiles over a well-run business. Caleb and Olivia rediscovered the joy in their spontaneous adventures, but this time with an understanding that not everything needed to be rushed. One evening, as they all sat around a bonfire on the ranch, the fire crackling softly in the cool night air, Caleb looked at Ethan and smirked. "You know," he said, nudging him with an elbow, "for once, I think you might have been right." Ethan chuckled. "First time for everything." Olivia rolled her eyes, leaning against Caleb with a grin. "Don't let it go to your head." Emma just smiled, watching them all, feeling the weight that had been pressing on them for so long finally start to lift. They had found what they had almost lost, and this time they wouldn't take it for granted. The shift in their approach to work brought not only relief, but a renewed sense of joy in everything they had built together. The business, once a source of endless stress, became what it was always meant to be, a shared dream, not an overwhelming burden. With more staff to handle daily operations and a better balance between work and life, Ethan, Caleb, Emma, and Olivia found themselves able to truly enjoy what they had worked so hard to create. Days at the ranch no longer felt like a race against time. Ethan took the morning slow, walking through the pastures before the lesson started, taking the time to truly appreciate the land. Emma often joined him, a coffee in hand, their quiet conversations about the day ahead filled with a newfound sense of ease. Caleb, always full of restless energy, finally found his rhythm. He still craved adventure, but now he wasn't running himself into the ground to prove anything. Olivia thrived in her element, bringing in new clients, expanding their marketing reach, but now she did so with the understanding that growth didn't need to come at the cost of their well-being. Months passed, and with them came milestones they hadn't even realized they were moving toward. Their business expanded naturally, not from pressure, but because they had built something strong, something that people wanted to be part of. The guided trail rides became one of the most sought-after experiences in the region. Their weekend retreat program brought families from all over, looking for a break from city life. Even their training programs attracted attention beyond their small town, and for the first time, they had a waiting list of riders eager to learn from them. As much as their professional lives flourished, their personal lives grew even richer. The rhythm they had settled into allowed them to focus on what mattered most: their relationships, their families, their future. It was in those quiet moments, away from the business meetings and expansion plans, that they realized just how much their lives had changed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and cast golden light over the ranch, Emma sat on the porch beside Ethan, her hand resting gently on his. He glanced at her, sensing something different in the way she was watching him. Before he could ask, she smiled and placed his hand over her stomach, her eyes shining with quiet excitement. It took a moment for it to register. When it did, Ethan felt something inside him shift. "You serious?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Emma nodded, her smile widening. Yeah, we're going to be parents. For the first time in a long time, Ethan found himself speechless. He looked at Emma, at the life they had built together, and at the future that was now unfolding in front of them. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new chapter they would write together. Not far away, in their own home, a similar moment was unfolding. Lauren paced the living room, her usual energy replaced with a nervous excitement as she watched Caleb across the room. He was flipping through a notebook, unaware of the way she was fidgeting, until she finally blurted it out. "Caleb." He looked up. "Yeah?" She took a deep breath. "We're having a baby." Caleb froze. The words sank in like a delayed reaction before he turned to her, his expression unreadable for a second. Then, as realization set in, a slow grin spread across his face. "Are you serious?" he asked, stepping toward her. She nodded, laughing at the disbelief in his voice. "I wouldn't joke about this." Caleb let out a breath, rubbing the back of his neck before shaking his head in wonder. "Damn," he muttered, then laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Guess we're really doing this." Olivia laughed against his chest. "Yeah, we are." The news changed everything. And yet, nothing at all. It was just another step in the life they were building together. Another adventure. Another challenge. Another joy. When they all gathered a few days later, the announcements were met with overwhelming excitement. Their parents were overjoyed, their friends equally thrilled, and as Ethan and Caleb stood beside each other, both knowing they were about to enter fatherhood at the same time, they couldn't help but laugh at how life had come full circle. Years ago, they had met Emma and Olivia by chance at a town festival, something neither of them had thought much about at the time. Now they were standing on the same land where their lives had first intertwined, about to start a new chapter, not just as husbands, but as fathers. As the months passed, preparations were made, plans adjusted, and excitement built. The ranch continued to thrive, but now it wasn't just about building a business. It was about building a home, a place where their children would grow up, surrounded by everything they had created. When the day finally arrived, when the cries of their newborns filled the air for the first time, Ethan and Caleb knew that nothing in their lives had ever mattered more. Holding their babies, their wives resting beside them, they felt the weight of everything they had built, everything they had endured, and everything that was still to come. Looking at each other, a silent understanding passed between them, the same one that had always been there since they were boys. No matter what came next, they would face it together. And as their children grew, as the ranch expanded, as the years passed, one thing remained certain. The bond between them, the one that had shaped their entire lives, would never waver. Their story had started long before they had even known where it would lead. And now it was only just beginning. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. It means a lot to have you here, listening to the journey of two brothers, two sisters, and the challenges that tested not only their love, but their deepest bonds. At its heart, this story is about family, resilience, and the power of understanding. Life is unpredictable. It will test us, push us, and sometimes break us apart. But the relationships that truly matter, the ones built on trust, love, and forgiveness, will always find a way back. Ethan and Caleb learned that success is not just about ambition, but about balance. Emma and Olivia reminded us that love is not just about passion, but about patience, and together they showed that even through hardships, the people who stand by us define our greatest victories. What about you? Where are you watching from? Have you ever experienced a moment where you had to fight to keep something precious in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another great video. We have more inspiring, emotional, and thought-provoking stories coming your way. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care and cherish the ones who matter most.